Montana Territory, 1873. The sky blackened as the storm clouds gathered over the rolling plains with frightening speed. 25-year-old Nathan Callahan urged his exhausted horse forward, the wind already whipping his duster around his lean frame. 3 days on the trail had left him weary, his normally bright blue eyes clouded with fatigue beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat. "Not much farther, boy," he murmured to the horse, though in truth, he had no idea where shelter might be found in this desolate stretch of prairie. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, cold and insistent, against his sun-bronzed skin. Nathan had spent the past 7 years drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying longer than a season. His father's dying words still haunted him. "The frontier breaks everyone eventually, son. A man stands stronger alone." Since burying his parents after a Sioux raid when he was 18, he'd built walls around his heart as solid as any frontier fort. The West was no place for permanence or attachment, a lesson written in the blood of too many graves he'd helped dig. Lightning cracked overhead, causing his horse to shy nervously. The downpour began in earnest now, and Nathan squinted against the deluge. Through the curtain of rain, he spotted a flicker of light in the distance, perhaps a mile away. Hope and desperation warred within him as he nudged his mount toward what might be his only chance for shelter. The small homestead materialized through the storm, a modest cabin with a barn alongside it, lamplight glowing in the windows. Nathan approached cautiously, years of frontier survival having taught him that strangers weren't always welcoming, especially to a rain-soaked cowboy appearing out of nowhere. Before he could dismount, the cabin door swung open, and a young woman stepped onto the porch, shotgun held confidently in her hands. Her long chestnut hair was tied back in a practical braid, and she wore a simple blue calico dress that couldn't hide her natural grace. "State your business," she called out, her voice carrying surprisingly well over the storm's howl. Nathan raised his hands slowly. "Just looking for shelter from the storm, ma'am. My horse and I have been riding 3 days from Fort Benton." The woman studied him for a long moment, the rain soaking her dress as she stood unmoving on the porch. Finally, she lowered the shotgun slightly. "You can stable your horse in the barn, there's feed in the bins, then come to the house." She turned without waiting for a response and disappeared back inside. 20 minutes later, having seen to his horse, Nathan knocked on the cabin door. The young woman opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting just on the other side. Up close, he could see she was even younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 20 years old, with striking amber eyes that regarded him warily. "Nathan Callahan," he offered, removing his hat and revealing dark blonde hair plastered to his head. "Zoe Whitaker," she replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "You can hang your wet things by the fire." The cabin's interior was modest but meticulously kept. A small table with 2 chairs, a cooking area, and a bed in the corner partially hidden by a curtain. Every surface gleamed with care and herbs hung drying from the ceiling beams. "You live here alone?" Nathan asked, immediately regretting the question when her eyes narrowed. "I can handle myself," she said firmly. "This is my father's homestead. He's away in Helena on business." Nathan nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. "I'm grateful for the shelter, Miss Whitaker. I won't impose longer than the storm demands." She gestured to a chair. "Sit, you look half-drowned." Without further comment, she ladled stew from a pot hanging over the fire into a bowl and set it before him along with a chunk of bread. As he ate, Nathan couldn't help noticing the way she moved with purposeful efficiency around the small space. There was pride in how she kept the cabin, but also a guarded tension in her shoulders. She was a woman accustomed to watching the horizon for threats. "Fine stew," he offered, breaking the silence. "My mother's recipe," she replied, her voice softening slightly at the mention of her mother. "She passed 3 winters ago." Nathan nodded. "My condolences. I lost both my parents 7 years back." He hadn't meant to share that. Sharing personal details only created connections, and connections were dangerous out here. Zoe studied him, her amber eyes suddenly penetrating. "Raiders?" "Yes." She nodded, a moment of understanding passing between them. "The storm will likely last through the night. You can sleep by the fire." The night passed with the storm battering the small cabin, rain drumming against the roof and thunder shaking the walls. Nathan lay awake, aware of Zoe's presence behind the curtain, listening to her even breathing. It had been years since he'd slept under the same roof as another person who wasn't a ranch hand or trail driver. It felt strangely intimate. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Nathan rose early. intending to be on his way with minimal further intrusion into Zoe Whitaker's life. He stepped outside to find her already at work, assessing damage to the garden from the storm's fury. Some of the fence posts came loose, she said without preamble. The south corner especially. Nathan nodded, reading the unspoken request. I can help fix that before I go, least I can do for your hospitality. They worked side by side throughout the morning, repairing the damage from the storm. Nathan found himself impressed by her competence. Zoe Whitaker was no delicate flower wilting in the frontier sun, but a woman who clearly knew every inch of her homestead and how to maintain it. As they worked, she gradually revealed more about herself. Her father had been gone 2 months already, having taken their cattle to sell in Helena. He was late returning. I'm starting to worry, she admitted as they hammered the last fence post into place. He should have been back weeks ago. Nathan hesitated. He planned to ride out after the repairs, continue his journey to nowhere in particular, the next ranch, the next cattle drive, the next temporary billet. But something in her amber eyes held him. I'm headed toward Helena myself, he found himself saying. I could look for him, bring back word. Her expression clouded. I can't pay you for such trouble. No payment necessary. Just a favor returned. Zoe studied him carefully, clearly weighing his offer against her suspicion of strangers. Finally, she nodded. His name is Joseph Whitaker. He would have been staying at the Frontier Hotel while conducting his business. That afternoon, as Nathan prepared to leave, a distant cloud of dust on the horizon caught their attention. Both froze, hands instinctively moving toward weapons, another hard-learned frontier lesson. As the riders drew closer, Zoe's body tensed. Callahan, she muttered, her voice tight with anger. 5 men approached the homestead, the leader a burly man with a thick beard and cold eyes. They stopped a short distance from where Nathan and Zoe stood, the leader's gaze sweeping over the property before settling on Zoe with naked interest that made Nathan's jaw clench. Miss Whitaker, the man called out, I see you survived the storm and found yourself some help. His eyes flicked to Nathan with clear disdain. What do you want, Callahan? Zoe's voice was steady, but Nathan noticed her white-knuckled grip on the fence post. Same as always, darlin'. Your land would connect my north and south pastures real nice. Your pa's been gone a mighty long time now. A woman alone can't manage a spread like this. I'm managing fine, she replied coldly. Callahan's smile didn't reach his eyes. For now, perhaps, but winter's coming. And without your pa's cattle money, how long before you're desperate? He glanced at Nathan again. Who's your friend? Just passing through, Nathan said mildly, though he'd positioned himself slightly in front of Zoe. Well, pass on through then, Cowboy. This is private business between neighbors. Zoe stepped forward. We're done talking, Callahan. My father will be back any day now. The older man laughed, a harsh sound. If you say so, girl, my offer stands. $500 for this worthless plot, more than generous. He tipped his hat mockingly. Think on it. Won't stay open forever. They watched the men ride away, dust settling in their wake. Only when they were distant specks did Zoe release the breath she'd been holding. How long has he been pressuring you? Nathan asked quietly. Since 2 weeks after father left, her eyes remained fixed on the horizon. He knows something about why father hasn't returned. Nathan made his decision then, though it went against everything he'd lived by since his parents' death. I'm staying a few more days, at least until we figure out what happened to your father. She turned to him, surprise evident in her features. Why would you do that? He shrugged, uncomfortable with examining his motivations too closely. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand alone against men like Callahan. Over the next days, a fragile routine developed between them. Nathan repaired the long-neglected barn roof and chopped enough firewood for weeks. Zoe tended her garden and prepared meals they shared at the small table. Neither spoke much, but the silence gradually transformed from wary to comfortable. At night, Nathan would lie by the fire, listening to the sounds of the prairie and thinking about Joseph Whitaker. Something about Callahan's confidence troubled him. The man seemed certain Joseph wouldn't return. On the 4th night, as they sat sharing a simple supper, Zoe suddenly asked, Where are you from originally, Nathan Callahan? The question startled him. Pennsylvania. My parents came west when I was 12, seeking land and opportunity. He paused. My father was a dreamer. And you're not. Nathan's laugh held no humor. Dreams get you killed out here. She studied him over her coffee cup. Is that why you drift, no dreams to chase? I drift because attachment is a luxury the frontier doesn't allow, he answered honestly. Everyone I've ever cared for is dead. The West takes everything eventually. Zoe's gaze didn't waver. My mother used to say that the frontier reveals what people truly are. The weak become weaker, the cruel become crueler. She paused. And the strong find strength they never knew they had. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Zoe set down her cup. She also said a life without love isn't surviving, it's just existing. The words hung between them, challenging the walls Nathan had built around his heart. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Callahan, Zoe whispered, reaching for her shotgun, but the rider who appeared in the doorway wasn't Callahan. It was a young man Nathan recognized from town, breathless and wide-eyed. Miss Whitaker, he panted, there's news from Helena about your father. The color drained from Zoe's face. Tell me. He's alive but hurt bad. Stage was ambushed coming back from Helena. Your pa took a bullet. He's at Doc Miller's in town. Within minutes they were riding hard toward the small settlement 15 miles away, the night air cold against their faces. Nathan could see the tension in Zoe's straight back, the fear she was trying desperately to control. They reached town just before midnight, the streets deserted except for the light still burning in the doctor's office. Nathan helped Zoe dismount, her legs unsteady with fear and the long ride. Inside, they found Joseph Whitaker pale and unconscious on a narrow bed, his breathing shallow. The doctor, a tired-looking man in his 60s, explained the situation grimly. Bullet took him in the chest. I removed it, but he's lost a lot of blood. The next 24 hours will tell. Zoe sank into a chair beside her father's bed, taking his limp hand between hers. Who did this? The doctor hesitated. Stage driver said it was 3 men. One had a distinctive red beard. Nathan and Zoe exchanged glances. One of Callahan's men had a beard that color. There's more, the doctor continued reluctantly. The strongbox with the cattle money was taken, every penny. Zoe's face crumpled for just a moment before she regained control. Will he recover, doctor? If infection doesn't set in, he has a chance, but he'll need weeks of care. Nathan watched as Zoe absorbed this news, calculating what it meant for her future, for the homestead. Without the cattle money, with winter approaching and her father incapacitated for weeks or months, you should stay with your father, Nathan said quietly. I'll ride back and look after the homestead. Zoe looked up at him, confusion clear in her amber eyes. You don't have to do that. You've already delayed your journey too long. Nathan shrugged. I've got nowhere special to be. For the first time since they'd met, a genuine smile softened her features. Thank you, Nathan. He nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude and even more uncomfortable with his own willingness to stay. Attachment was dangerous. Caring for people, for this woman and her father, was inviting heartbreak. And yet he found himself unable to ride away. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Nathan divided his time between the homestead and town, bringing supplies to Zoe and news of her father's slow improvement. He repaired the cabin roof, reinforced the barn door, and kept watch for Callahan's men. Zoe spent her days at her father's bedside and her nights in a small room the doctor's wife had offered her. Each time Nathan appeared with fresh clothes or food from the homestead, the gratitude in her eyes grew, along with something else he was afraid to name. On the 15th day, as Nathan arrived in town, he found Zoe sitting on the doctor's porch, her face alight with relief. Father woke up this morning, she said, standing as Nathan approached. He's weak, but the doctor says the worst has passed. That's good news, Nathan replied, genuinely pleased. He'd grown to respect Joseph Whitaker from Zoe's stories, a man who had built something from nothing, who had raised a daughter with both strength and compassion. He asked about the homestead, Zoe continued, and about you. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I told him how you've been helping. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, just being neighborly. Her expression turned serious. We both know that's not true. You could have ridden on weeks ago. She stepped closer. Why did you stay, Nathan? The question stripped away his defenses, leaving him vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. Looking into her amber eyes, he found he couldn't lie. Because for the first time since my parents died, I found somewhere that feels. He searched for the word real. Zoe reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. Father wants to meet you. Will you come inside? Joseph Whitaker was propped up in bed, his face gaunt but his eyes alert. He studied Nathan with open curiosity as Zoe made the introductions. So you're the drifter who's been looking after my daughter and my land, he said, his voice weak but steady. Your daughter's been looking after herself just fine, sir. I just helped with some repairs. Joseph's eyes crinkled. That's not what Sheriff Taylor tells me. Says you've been riding regular patrols around our property line, keeping Calhoun's men at bay. Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Calhoun's responsible for the stage robbery, for your shooting. I know, Joseph replied grimly, recognized his man with the red beard clear as day, but proving it is another matter. Zoe leaned forward. We'll figure that out later, Father. You need to rest now. As they left the sick room, Zoe turned to Nathan in the quiet hallway. You didn't tell me about the patrols. Didn't seem important. Her eyes softened. It is to me. She hesitated. Nathan. When Father is well enough to return home, what will you do? The question caught him off guard, though he'd been asking himself the same thing each night as he lay alone in the cabin. The answer that came to his lips surprised him. I don't know. For the first time, I'm not sure I want to move on. The admission hung between them, charged with possibility. Before Zoe could respond, commotion erupted in the street outside, shouting voices and the sounds of running feet. They hurried to the window to see people rushing toward the center of town. Fire, someone yelled. Fire at the Whitaker place. Terror flooded Zoe's face as they ran outside. In the distance, beyond the town limits, a column of black smoke rose against the blue sky, exactly in the direction of her homestead. They rode hard, Nathan's heart pounding with each hoofbeat. By the time they crested the final hill, the barn was fully engulfed in flames, and men were working frantically to keep the fire from spreading to the cabin. Calhoun stood watching from horseback, his expression one of mock concern as they galloped up. Terrible accident, he called out, gesturing to the inferno. Lightning strike, most likely. There hasn't been a storm in weeks, Zoe spat, dismounting. You did this. Calhoun shrugged. Prove it. His eyes narrowed. My offer still stands, Miss Whitaker. Though I'm thinking 400 might be more appropriate now, given the damage. Nathan stepped forward, rage coursing through him. You're not getting this land. And who's going to stop me? You, Calhoun laughed. You're nothing but a saddle tramp. You'll be gone with the next breeze. He turned back to Zoe. Your pa's laid up, your barn's gone, winter's coming, and you've got no money from those cattle. You'll be begging me to buy this worthless dirt before the first snow. With that, he wheeled his horse and rode away, his men following behind him. They worked into the night, saving what they could. The barn was a total loss, along with the winter hay stored inside and most of the tools. The cabin survived, though one wall was scorched. As they finally sat exhausted on the porch steps, Zoe's face was streaked with soot and tears. He's right, she whispered. Without the barn, without the cattle money, we can't make it through winter. Nathan stared out at the smoldering ruins. Something had shifted inside him as he'd fought the fire alongside Zoe. Watching Calhoun threaten everything she'd built, everything she loved, had awakened feelings he thought long dead, protectiveness, rage, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Yes, you can, he said finally, because I'm staying. Her head snapped up. What? I'm staying, he repeated more firmly this time. We'll rebuild the barn. I've got some savings from my last cattle drive. It's not much, but it'll help get you through winter. Why would you do that? Disbelief colored her voice. Nathan turned to her, allowing himself to truly look at her, really see her for perhaps the first time. The amber eyes that held both strength and vulnerability, the determined set of her jaw, the grace with which she faced each challenge. Because you offered me shelter from a storm when you had every reason not to trust a stranger, he said quietly. And because for 7 years I've been running from connection, from caring about anyone or anything. But sitting in your cabin, working this land, for the first time I've felt like I'm living instead of just surviving. Zoe's eyes glistened in the moonlight. What about your belief that attachment is dangerous out here? That caring gets you killed. Maybe that's just an excuse to avoid the risk of loss. He looked down at his calloused hands. My father was wrong. Standing alone isn't strength, it's fear. The next morning, they rode into town together to share their plan with Joseph. The older man listened carefully, his eyes moving between his daughter and the young cowboy. "You're proposing to stay through winter, help rebuild?" he asked Nathan. "Yes, sir, if you'll have me." Joseph studied him for a long moment. "And after winter?" The question hung in the air. Nathan glanced at Zoe, finding her watching him intently. "That depends," he said finally. Joseph's eyes crinkled knowingly. "I see." He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. "There's something you should know. The cattle money wasn't all stolen." Zoe leaned forward. "What?" "I split it. Half I carried with me, half I deposited in the bank in Helena before leaving." He smiled at their shocked expressions. "I've dealt with men like Callahan before, always have a contingency plan." Relief washed over Zoe's face. "So we're not destitute." "Far from it, we can rebuild, restock in spring." Joseph turned his attention back to Nathan. "But your help would still be welcome, young man." "Very welcome indeed." As they left the doctor's office, a new lightness filled Nathan's chest. For the first time in years, he felt something like hope taking root. "We should celebrate," Zoe suggested, her amber eyes dancing. "Father's recovery, the money, you staying." Nathan smiled, allowing himself to imagine a future beyond the next cattle drive or ranch job. "What did you have in mind?" That night they sat on the porch of the damaged but standing cabin, sharing a bottle of wine Zoe had been saving for a special occasion. The air was crisp with approaching autumn, the stars brilliant overhead. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," Zoe said, drawing her shawl closer around her shoulders. "What was it like?" Nathan closed his eyes, summoning memories he'd long suppressed. "Green, so green it hurt your eyes sometimes. And the winters, snow piled higher than a man's head. My mother would make maple candy by pouring hot syrup onto the fresh snow." "It sounds beautiful." It was. He opened his eyes, looking at her in the soft lamplight spilling from the window. "What about you? Have you always been here?" "Born right in that cabin," she said, nodding toward the door. "My mother used to talk about Boston, where she grew up, said she missed the theaters and libraries, but she loved my father more than city comforts." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Zoe's expression grew thoughtful. "She's the one who taught me to always offer shelter to those in need, said you never know when an act of kindness might change your life." Their eyes met, the implication hanging between them. Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Your mother was wise," he murmured. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Both tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but relaxed when they recognized Sheriff Taylor's voice calling out a greeting. The sheriff dismounted, followed by two deputies. His expression was grimly satisfied as he approached the porch. "Evening, Miss Whitaker. Callahan. Thought you'd want to know, we've arrested Callahan and his men." "For the stage robbery?" Zoe asked, hope and disbelief mingling in her voice. "That and for burning your barn. One of his men got liquored up in the saloon tonight, started bragging about it." The sheriff shook his head. "Some criminals make my job too easy." Relief flooded through Nathan. "What will happen to them?" "The robbery and shooting are federal offenses. They'll be sent to the territorial prison for a long stretch." Sheriff Taylor's weathered face softened as he looked at Zoe. "Your father can rest easy now, miss." "And so can you." After the sheriff left, a new peace settled over the homestead. Nathan and Zoe sat in comfortable silence, the wine forgotten as they processed this unexpected turn of events. "It's over," Zoe said finally, wonder in her voice. "We're safe." Nathan nodded, though a new uncertainty was growing within him. With Calhoun gone and Joseph recovering, with the financial security of the bank deposit, his presence was no longer necessary for their survival. The practical reasons for his staying were disappearing. As if reading his thoughts, Zoe turned to him. "This doesn't change anything about what you said yesterday, does it?" He met her gaze steadily. "No. If anything, it makes my choice clearer." He took a deep breath. "I'm not staying because you need protection anymore. I'm staying because I want to be here, with you." The weeks that followed brought rapid change to the Whitaker homestead. With Calhoun in custody and the threat removed, neighboring ranchers who'd been intimidated by the man came forward to help rebuild the barn. Joseph returned home, moving slowly but growing stronger each day, and Nathan found himself putting down roots for the first time since his parents' death. Each morning he woke with purpose, repairing fences, planning the new barn layout, preparing for winter. Each evening he sat at the table with Zoe and Joseph, no longer a guest but something closer to family. The feelings growing between him and Zoe deepened with each passing day, though both were cautious, taking time to truly know one another beyond the crisis that had brought them together. On a crisp October evening, with the new barn frame standing tall against the sunset sky, Nathan found Zoe standing alone, watching the fading light paint the prairie gold. "Your father tells me you used to dream of seeing other places," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Boston, San Francisco, even Europe." She smiled without looking at him, girlish fantasies. "I love this land too much to leave it." "What if you didn't have to choose?" Nathan asked quietly. "What if you could see those places and still come home?" Now she turned to him, curiosity in her amber eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he took her hands in his, heart hammering against his ribs. "I mean that home isn't just a place, it's people, it's who you return to." Understanding dawned in her expression. "Nathan, I've been running for 7 years," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "Afraid to care, to build anything lasting, convinced the frontier would just take it away again. Then a storm forced me to your door and you offered shelter to a stranger." His voice grew husky. "You sheltered more than just my body that night, Zoe. You gave my heart somewhere to rest." Tears glistened in her eyes as she squeezed his hands. "And you protected more than just our land. You helped me believe in goodness again after Callahan, after everything." Nathan dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Zoe Whitaker, I love you. I want to build a life with you here, to see the world with you if that's your wish, to grow old on this land together." He swallowed hard. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, pulling him to his feet. "Yes." Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the promise of their shared future. When they finally parted, both were laughing through tears. "My father will be pleased," Zoe said, resting her forehead against his. "He's been dropping hints for weeks." Nathan chuckled. "I know. He cornered me in the barn yesterday, asked about my intentions." Spring 1874 brought new life to the Whitaker homestead. The new barn stood complete, cattle grazed in the pastures, and wildflowers carpeted the prairie. On a perfect May morning, Nathan Callahan stood beneath an arch of woven branches, watching as Zoe walked toward him on her father's arm, radiant in her mother's wedding dress. Neighbors and friends from miles around had gathered to witness their vows, the community that had helped rebuild after the fire now celebrating new beginnings. As they exchanged promises before the traveling preacher, Nathan marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The false belief that had driven him for years, that the frontier allowed no place for love, that attachment was weakness, had been replaced by a deeper truth. Love was not a vulnerability but a strength, especially in this harsh land. That evening, as lanterns glowed and fiddle music filled the air, Nathan pulled his bride close for a dance. "Mrs. Callahan," he murmured against her hair, "how does it sound?" "Perfect," she replied, her amber eyes shining up at him, "though I was thinking we might still use Whitaker for the ranch name. Whitaker Callahan Ranch has a nice ring." "It does indeed," his arms tightened around her. "Your father mentioned he's thinking of building a small house for himself near the creek, giving us the main cabin." Zoe smiled mischievously. "He says it's because he wants his privacy, but I think he's making room for grandchildren." Nathan laughed, joy bubbling up from a place inside him he'd thought long dead. "Well, we shouldn't disappoint him then." As night fell over the celebration, Nathan stood with his arm around his wife, watching their friends and neighbors dance beneath the stars. The frontier hadn't changed. It was still dangerous, still unpredictable, still capable of taking everything in an instant. But he had changed. The storm that had driven him to Zoe's door had washed away his father's bitter lessons and his own fears. In their place grew something stronger, a love rooted in shared struggle and mutual respect, in protection freely offered and gratefully received. Together they had built something that could weather any storm the frontier might send their way, a home, a family, a future filled with possibility. And as they turned toward their cabin, toward the beginning of their life together, Nathan knew with bone-deep certainty that he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, not just shelter, but belonging.